Okay, interesting, it didn't give anybody a little, recording is started. All right,
There it is.
we're off.
All right. Welcome, everybody. My name's Tyler Kanczuzewski. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability at Inovateus Solar. And today we have a conversation with some great folks about low carbon solar, solar panel recycling, and more. So I'm excited to have here today Michael Parr, the Executive Director of the Ultra Low Carbon Solar Alliance. Thanks for being here, Michael.
Happy to.
We have Kelly Weger, the Director of Sustainability at Qcells. Thanks, Kelly.
Happy to be here.
And Debbie Graham-Clifford, the Director of Global Development of the Global Electronics Council. It's known as the GEC. Debbie, really happy to have you here. It's exciting times.
Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, appreciate being invited to join in this discussion today. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to try to make this conversational, a little bit different than the typical webinar. So feel free to chime in if you guys want, and any points that we want to emphasize for our listeners. So Michael, if you want to kick it off on this slide.
So, people have asked, why an eco label for PV? Why are folks interested in more sustainable solar? And there are a number of reasons, but one of the things that most drove our attention to the matter are the really large differences in carbon emissions in the solar manufacturing sector, depending on where it's located. And this really relates to the nature of the power grid. And there's been extensive academic work by the National Renewable Energy Lab, International Energy Agency, and others that demonstrates that solar manufacturing in China, where the industry is heavily concentrated, is significantly more carbon intensive than solar manufacturing in the US or the EU, which is intuitive given the much higher carbon intensity of the Chinese grid, where they're still using a great deal of coal. And in the solar industry in particular, they've got the most energy intensive components of the industry concentrated in the Xinjiang province, which is almost wholly coal powered. And so what this means is that a solar module produced entirely in the Chinese supply chain will be 50 to 70% more carbon intensive than a solar module produced in the US or EU solar supply chain. And we think what this represents is a significant opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint of solar manufacturing. And we believe the eco label, by giving buyers a tool to send a market signal, can facilitate a market change in how we make solar going forward.
What the number on the left, Michael, is that like carbon tonnage? Oh.
Yeah, this is obviously kind of a very simplified diagram. It basically represents that for every single solar panel made in China, twice the amount of carbon emissions as compared to a solar panel made in the US. And this reflects the entire supply chain, right? So this is from mining the quartz to make the polysilicon, to make the wafer, to make the cell, all the way through the module.
Is there any other like broader implications of the high carbon emissions that you can think of, like big picture?
And if you look at the next slide, Tyler, there's been some work done to try to understand what the ramifications of this carbon difference is. And there's some work done by the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance using some work done by Breakthrough Energy that basically estimates that within a decade, if we stay on the business as usual trajectory with most of the manufacturing happening in China, and especially in Xinjiang, that the emissions in the solar manufacturing sector would rise to equal those of the global aluminum industry, which is recognized as one of the higher emitting global sectors, and by 2040 would exceed that of aluminum. And so we're talking about on the order of almost 20 billion tons of additional CO2 emissions by 2040. And some recent work by NREL extended that out to 2050, an estimated 30 billion tons of additional CO2 emissions. So that's a big bogey to try to go after to reduce. When you consider how few tools we have to reduce emissions at that scale, simply changing how we manufacture what's supposed to be a clean energy source looks like a pretty appealing way to go.
So would you say that's why there's a carbon footprint criteria for EPEAT, or is there other criteria?
Yeah, so we worked really closely with the GEC to help to develop these detailed carbon footprint criteria, but they had already done a great deal of good work to build out very, very broad ESG criteria into their EPEAT Ecolabel. And I turn to Debbie to talk about that.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. So yeah, great question, Tyler, as far as the criteria are concerned. So EPEAT is actually the world's premier eco-label for electronics products and services. So talking about criteria other than just the ultra low carbon solar criteria, I think the slide actually gives you a good overview of the full set of the criteria. So EPEAT criteria are actually grouped into priority sustainability impact areas, which, as you can see here, are climate change mitigation, the sustainable use of resources or circularity, as well as the reduction of chemicals of concern. And last but certainly not least, as far as the solar industry is concerned, obviously corporate ESG performance. And I think actually if you can show the next slide, Tyler, I can give a little bit of an overview of how the criteria are actually developed.
Perfect.
So when we're developing new product category criteria, we use a fully transparent, multi-stakeholder process involving industry stakeholders, government, NGO representatives, and academic experts to develop the criteria. So there are opportunities within the process for the public to provide input as well. Once a technical committee reached consensus and the criteria are formally adopted by EPEAT, we then publish the criteria for a specific product category. So we then follow that up by reviewing the criteria every 3 years to see if they need to be updated. As we're all aware, technology is changing rapidly, and so that process actually includes the need for review and update as needed. So to register products to the EPEAT standard, companies need to actually demonstrate to the satisfaction of a third-party conformity assurance body, or CABs, as we call them, that they meet all of the required criteria, which is the bronze EPEAT tier, and any optional criteria that they choose to pursue. So that would be either the silver or the gold EPEAT tier, which, and of course, this process actually includes, extensive documentation, as well as the possibility of including facility audits. Once a manufacturer actually has products in the EPEAT registry, we also routinely audit compliance for these criteria through our continuous monitoring process.
Nice, pretty rigorous. Do you guys also have criteria for low carbon?
We do. I'll defer to Michael on that one. He'll cover that area.
Yeah, if you flip to the next slide, Tyler, these are the most recent criteria developed and added to EPEAT for solar, and they were developed, as Debbie said, in a multi-stakeholder process that involved industry experts, government, academia, and a wide range of folks from around the world. And these are quite detailed and technical, and they're based on a lot of work that came before. There are programs in the French and South Korean governments that created preferences for PV modules with low carbon footprints, and they developed some very technical calculation methodologies. There's also been some work in Norway's produced so-called product category rules for determining carbon footprint, and all of that prior work was drawn on, as well as transparent public databases of life cycle information published by the International Energy Agency. And just to maybe a little bit of a deep dive into how these work. First, that it's a life cycle based assessment. So this means from mining the quartz to create the metallurgical grade silicon, to refining the silicon, to making the wafers, and all the way through, right to final module assembly. So so-called cradle to gate. The reason it stops at module assembly is all of the academic work has shown that that's the vast majority of the carbon footprint. Transportation actually accounts for quite a small proportion of it. So this sweeps in the vast majority. And it includes all of the major materials. So as I mentioned, polysilicon, the wafer, the cell, the glass, the frame, the back sheet, all the main components. So it's quite comprehensive. To make it as easy as possible for manufacturers while keeping the rigor, there are basically two ways a company can demonstrate their carbon footprint at each step of the supply chain. One so-called path A is kind of you might imagine a standard lookup table that says, all right, my polysilicon comes from Germany. I look across the table, there's the number per gram of polysilicon. My wafer was made in Norway. All right, there's a figure for, per square millimeter of wafer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are conservative numbers because, they're using data from the IEA's life cycle inventory. But if you can just look across at all of your materials, pick them out of that table and add them up, and you get a number that meets the threshold in EPEAT, it's a relatively low cost way to do it, and that's good. But if you believe you can reach a lower threshold and therefore get more points in EPEAT's tiered scoring system, there's a path B that you can apply for any particular element of the supply chain as well. And that involves a very detailed site-specific life cycle analysis. And the criteria lay out very specifically the methodology that you have to use to do that life cycle analysis, because it's critical that you have apples to apples comparability. And so each life cycle analysis is done in the same way with the same boundary criteria and same assumptions, so that, frankly, people can't game the system in how they calculate their numbers. And just to show you a little bit of the rigor, you have to demonstrate in great detail exactly what is in the module that you're analyzing. How many grams of polysilicon are in that wafer? How many wafers and cells are in the module? How thick is the glass? What's the weight of your aluminum frame? All of that, you have to show detailed business documentation to demonstrate that you have met, if you go back one, to demonstrate you've met all of those criteria, including normal breakage that happens in the manufacturing process, because there's carbon involved in that wafer. If you break the wafer and don't use it, you still have to account for that carbon. And then just to double check that, you actually have to have an independent laboratory take the module, disassemble it, and weigh and measure every single component to verify the exact component specifications that go into your carbon footprint. And as Debbie mentioned, it requires a company to demonstrate that they have independent audits of all of their suppliers in the prior 12 months, and the conformity assurance bodies can follow up to confirm those audits. And so this is really intended to create a high level of transparency in the supply chain. And then, as Debbie mentioned, the level of third-party review is one of the things that we find really attractive about this. And for the life cycle criteria, the carbon footprint, not only do you have to go out and hire an LCA expert to do the calculations, you then have to get an independent expert to review and confirm those calculations. And then the conformity assurance body, in addition, confirms that was all done properly. So these are pretty airtight. And frankly, the reason for that is some of the industry participants who are involved in this are a little worried about some folks maybe trying to game the system a little bit. And we need to make it, really, really straightforward, so that whenever that eco label shows up in a module, a buyer can have a very high level of confidence in the rigor of the footprint. And then because technologies change so fast in this industry, as you know, you have to come back every year and demonstrate that you still meet the criteria. So you have to reconfirm your carbon footprint annually. So this is a leadership criteria not to be undertaken lightly. It's a fair bit of work
Yeah.
to get this done, as I think Kelly can probably attest.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah. Yeah, definitely very comprehensive. It requires the companies to demonstrate, that really trying to lower the carbon footprint is a priority. So Debbie, how is the EPEAT used exactly?
Yeah, that's another great question, Tyler. So as I mentioned, EPEAT is known as the world's premier electronics eco-label, and it serves as a free resource for procurement professionals, so the buying community, obviously, to identify and select products with reduced impacts across key sustainability issues. So EPEAT can easily be included in buyers' procurement processes without them having to personally review a lot of detailed life cycle analyses that, as Michael was just telling us about, in the scenarios that he mentioned. And they don't need to determine if a supplier's claims are valid on their own. By simply buying EPEAT registered products, this lets them know that both the product as well as the brand, because EPEAT actually looks at a product and the organization who is actually registering that product as a whole. So again, a buyer actually using EPEAT to purchase registered products lets them know that both the product and the brand have met all of the required or bronze level criteria that I mentioned, as well as optional criteria depending on the EPEAT tier of what they're purchasing.
Nice. So how can the solar manufacturers reduce the carbon footprint in their supply chain?
If you show the next slide, Tyler, I think kind of a little bit of an overview of that. There's some sort of commonalities across the supply chain. Obviously, the first and most major ways lower the carbon intensity of your grid supplied energy. That's either locate your plant in an area that already has a relatively low carbon grid. So maybe an area that's got a lot of hydro or a lot of renewables in the grid already. You can also do self-generation of renewables in your factory to reduce the high carbon grid energy you're pulling in. This sort of thing is being looked at in India, for example. You can also tell your government, get on the stick about decarbonizing the grid because I want low carbon energy supplied to my factory because I want to make low carbon products. There's also traditional manufacturing energy efficiency measures you can take so that that energy that is coming in, you are maximizing the application of. There are energy efficient technologies that you can apply. So for example, in making polysilicon, the fluidized bed reactor technology is more energy efficient inherently than the Siemens reactor. So you can choose a lower carbon technology. There's some innovations in wafers, for example, that instead of taking polysilicon and remelting it and recasting an ingot and sawing off a wafer, all of which is pretty energy intensive, people are developing direct wafer technologies where you essentially go from either silicon gas or liquid polysilicon directly to a wafer. And then there are basic materials efficiencies, minimizing waste in the process, internal recycle, just the kind of things you do to button up a manufacturing operation and improve overall efficiency and yield, meaning more of your raw materials end up as finished products. And we're also seeing at the very end of the line in module assembly, some really interesting innovations going on in framing and cover materials. So some people are playing with low carbon recycled steel frames that I know starting to get some traction. And one of our members in the Netherlands is using polymers for both the frame and the top, the what would otherwise be a glass sheet, and with an increasing recycled content in that polymer over time to drive down the carbon footprint.
Great. So yeah, thanks, Michael and Debbie. And just to kind of summarize what we've talked about so far, we've laid out how the EPEAT works and the comprehensive nature of it, reviews by third parties, You guys have also talked about how buyers would use EPEAT in purchasing. So now next, what's in it for the buyers, and why would they want to specify EPEAT registered modules in their projects or in their PPA projects that are development projects? What's in it for the solar manufacturers, as well?
Yeah, Tyler, I can kind of jump in and talk a little bit about that. So first of all, kind of tying back into the what's in it for the buyer, I'll come full circle to that. But I want to just kind of reiterate what Debbie was sharing about, and Michael as well. I mean, from my perspective, from the manufacturer's perspective, it's a really interesting eco-label because I understand the incredible amount of rigor that goes into achieving this. I mean, we are in the process of collecting all of the data required to prove all of these things, to meet the criteria. And I will tell you, it is intense. This is not like an Energy Star label. This is a very intensive process. And I think Debbie, I don't know if you shared, but I believe this was really kind of designed so that only 30% of the solar manufacturers would meet the threshold, the minimum threshold. So it really is set up to really already be sort of the top performing companies that are really paying attention to all of these criteria. And, for us, that means it makes it easier for the buyers. It also helps us to have, that third party verification. So Qcells, we really pride ourselves on being a leader in sustainability. And, for some people, they might think, well, a solar panel is a solar panel. We're already doing great things, right? That's the whole point of solar. But there really is a pretty surprising disparity in what the holistic sustainability aspects are from one solar panel to another. So for us as a manufacturer, this is going to be, an incredible, market differentiator. It's going to be something where, I get asked constantly from various customers or potential customers, what are you guys doing in sustainability? They might have a sustainability questionnaire or survey that they ask us to fill out. And a lot of the questions that I get asked are answered. They're included in this label. So I'm pretty excited to be able to point to this and say, hey, look, somebody else has already gone through and vetted us. Just, trust the eco label, and you can, find all of the facts that support that document here. So it's really beneficial for us in that way, that I think it will simplify the process, and for the customers, it'll honestly make their lives a lot easier trying to figure out who to trust. So that transparency and traceability, I think is really important. Again, both from the manufacturer's perspective and for the buyers. A lot of our customers, they're not just buying solar because they have extra money to spend. They're doing it because they really care and they want to find low carbon, options. So it really does help them to lower their own carbon. And I think some folks are just starting to even think about what is the embodied carbon in a solar panel. So now that this entity, this eco label exists, that work has already been done to differentiate. And I think it'll be just, a lot clearer and easier for buyers. So they understand what they're getting. They don't have to spend as much time digging into the supply chain or verifying that the manufacturer is truly doing what they say they're doing, because somebody else has already done that. So it'll make it a lot simpler for them. And also, the more buyers that actually seek out the EPEAT eco label products, the more that demand is going to change the market. And not just us. I would love it if every solar manufacturer said, what, this is really important. We all need to be investing in this so that we can, as a whole industry, lower the carbon intensity and tackle climate change that much faster. So I think it's a great opportunity for both us and for the buyers.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Sorry. I'm interested as well in your guys' recycling initiatives. We were talking earlier before we started the conversation about some things you guys were doing. I thought it was really cool if you wanted to share any of that.
Yeah, I can jump in to kick it off. I mean, so recycling is something that Debbie can share. It is baked in. It is a part of the criteria that are options for this, for the EPEAT eco label. Us as a company, we are always looking for options to work closer towards closing that gap for a circular economy. And so recycling is a really important part of that. Now, as an industry, PV recycling is still very nascent, which it poses some challenges. You know, there are a wide variety of companies out there that are recycling, but the amount or degree of value that they're actually getting out of those products varies. And so I think that's a challenge for anybody who's in the task of recycling solar panels to understand that those are also not all created equal. We really want to find recyclers that are extracting as much as possible and not just, you know, turning those into low grade materials or downcycling, but really trying to get those back into the loop to create new products.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I'll just add, actually, within the EPEAT criteria, as Kelly just mentioned, there is the criteria that are based around end of life, right? Processing of material, whether that's recycling or true end of life, right? Disposal. There, as I mentioned before, EPEAT is unique in the sense that it's a tiered eco-label. So there is the bronze required, where you have to meet every single one of those criteria. As you can imagine, at the bronze level, that's a baseline, right? So basically, this would be a requirement that everyone has to meet, as I said. And if manufacturers choose to pursue the optional criteria around, again, end-of-life processing, sustainable use of resources, it's pretty obvious that the more disclosure there is, right, in terms of, information being available, to the buying public, information on their website, right, annual reporting, things like that, then there are optional points that are available for those manufacturers that go those steps further, right, than just as I said, the bronze criteria. And to tie into, Kelly, the comment that you made about the standard being, really designed for a specific portion of the market. It's written into the standard. It is designed, right, to show sustainability leadership on the part of the manufacturers that choose to pursue it. I think the expectation is between 30 to 35% of the products in the marketplace will meet all of the requirements, and which makes sense, because obviously if everybody was able to meet them, we wouldn't need this standard, right? It would just be the norm. So it definitely is showing sustainability leadership on the parts of companies like Qcells for solar, and other manufacturer actually that has products registered now in the registry, and those that choose to join going forward.
And I would just note, Tara, that along with Qcells, a number of other Alliance members are very actively involved with Solar Cycle, and we're strongly supportive. Their vision is to get to scale so that first they can reach what they call landfill parity. So it costs no more to recycle than it does to landfill, so that it's economic decision to recycle and not stick it in the landfill. And that's really important. And we get the scale up and the efficiency up to do that, just like solar manufacturing itself. But the other thing they're intent on doing is, as Kelly said, closing the circle as much as they can. So right now, unfortunately, a lot of recycle is grind up a module and sell it as aggregate for concrete or macadam, which is very, very low value. But increasingly, Solar Cycle's getting the copper back, they're getting the silver back. Can we get from module frame back to module frame? Longer term, can we get from glass back to glass? These aren't simple technological or economic challenges, but that's the long-term vision, and that's the way I think a lot of companies are trying to. The reason they're partnering with Solar Cycle is to drive that vision forward. So, congrats to Qcells for working with them on that.
Yeah, that's awesome, exciting news. I mean, with everything happening right now, the amazing growth that's happening, it's good to know we have these solutions, so we're having a lesser footprint. In my role at Inovateus Solar, we're mostly EPC and developer. We're based in South Bend, and so we're seeing a lot of growth, a lot of solar ground mounts and tracker systems and farmland and all that. It's just been last 5 years has been crazy, and so now we've been putting together a green procurement strategy, and Jefferson Gerwig is our director of procurement, so him and I are working on it. He actually got his green purchasing certification through the American Purchasing Society. So we're trying to make some headway in this too, and I think we want to include everything that we're talking about today in our green purchasing documentation for our company and our partners. So hopefully we can get more EPCs and developers to think about these things as well. Well, any other final final comments. Yeah, it was a pleasure talking with you guys and diving deep into this low carbon solar.
Just thanks for having us on. This is we're all involved in something pretty exciting here, and so thanks for helping to share it broadly with your audience and help people kind of move along this path towards a more sustainable industry.
Yeah, and I
Thanks,
would just
Michael.
say it's an exciting time. It's a very exciting time in solar, and between things like the new EPEAT Ecolabel, obviously the Inflation Reduction Act, there are going to be so many changes in our industry in the U.S. And so Qcells, we are extremely excited about it and can't wait to see where we're at 2 years from now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Agreed.
Thanks,
I would just
Kelly.
say, oh, sorry, Tyler, didn't mean to cut you off. I would just say to add to Michael and Kelly's points about obviously being an exciting time for us. We're seeing a lot of momentum now around the the eco label, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the criteria were published, right? Now they're available, right? People can actually see them. What do we have to meet, et cetera. And from the buying perspective, obviously, people can see what's included, right? What this covers for them. I think as you just mentioned now, for developers, right, who actually will incorporate EPEAT into their procurement efforts, that sends a great signal, right, to manufacturers that we want this, right? The buying community, developers, investors, right? There is a need for this. So from the manufacturing perspective, obviously, as Kelly said, right, great differentiator. So we're looking forward to this, in the next couple of months, actually seeing, to seeing the registry grow, right? Having a great choice of products there for buyers that are looking for sustainable solar. That's the goal.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good way to end on that positive note.
Great.
So Debbie, Kelly, Michael, really appreciate your time today. It was a pleasure.
Thanks
Thanks,
so much.
Tyler.
Great to talk to everybody.
Thanks again.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Cheers.
Take care.